어젯밤 대한민국의 심장이자 민주주의의 상징인 국회 앞은 그야말로 아수라장이 되고 말았습니다. 밤 10시 30분경 긴급 담화가 전격 발표되며 비상계엄령이 선포되자 이 소식은 순식간에 전국을 뒤흔들어 버렸는데요. 각 방송사는 예정된 프로그램을 중단하고 일제히 비상 방송 체제로 돌입했으며 TV 화면은 긴급 속보로 도배되었고 비상계엄령 발동이라는 붉은 자막은 보는 이들의 심장을 서늘하게 만들었습니다. 동시에 SNS와 메신저에는 관련 속보가 폭풍처럼 퍼져나갔고 사람들은 서로에게 정보를 공유하며 혼란과 공포를 감추지 못했습니다. 국회 앞의 상황은 더욱 혼돈 그 자체였습니다. 시민들은 처음에는 집 안에서 뉴스에 집중하며 혼란스러워했지만 자정이 가까워질수록 불안에 휩싸인 시민들은 국회 앞으로 몰려들기 시작했습니다. 처음엔 몇몇 소수의 시민들이 조용히 모이기 시작했고 불과 몇 시간 만에 그 수는 수천 명으로 불어났는데요. 급기야 계엄령 철회하라라는 구호가 밤하늘을 가르며 울려 퍼졌습니다. 곳곳에서는 시민들의 항의와 격렬한 몸싸움이 벌어졌습니다. 국회를 에워싼 군인들은 시민들을 저지하려 했으나 시민들을 막기에는 역부족이었는데요. 어떤 이들은 즉석에서 연설을 시작하며 계엄령의 부당함을 외쳤고 다른 이들은 군인들과 직접 몸싸움을 벌이며 저항했습니다. 하지만 긴장감이 최고조에 이르렀을 때 예상치 못한 장면이 펼쳐졌습니다. 격렬한 충돌 속에서 몸싸움을 벌이던 한 군인이 시민의 저항에 밀려 바닥에 쓰러졌고 주변은 일촉즉발의 위기에 휩싸였는데요. 그러나 그 순간 군인을 돕기 위해 시민 몇 명이 나섰습니다. 그들은 군인의 손을 잡아 일으켜 세웠고 이 모습은 긴장된 공기를 잠시나마 누그러뜨렸습니다. 이번엔 반대로 한 시민이 군인에 의해 밀쳐지며 압박을 당하자 다른 군인들이 그를 토닥여주며 안정시켜주는 모습이 포착되었습니다. 군복을 입은 이들과 시민들이 마주한 이 아이러니한 장면은 도대체 왜 같은 국민끼리 서로 대치해야만 하는지에 대한 질문을 던지며 많은 사람들에게 쓸쓸함을 안겨주었습니다. 이내 이러한 혼란 속에서 국회 내부에서는 계엄령 해제를 위한 긴급 회의가 열렸고 결국 새벽 2시경 계엄령 해제 요구 결의안을 가결했습니다. 계엄령 철회 소식이 전해지자 군인들도 질서를 회복하기 위해 시민들과 소통하며 상황을 정리하는 모습을 보였는데요. 국회를 에워쌌던 군 병력은 차례로 철수하기 시작했고 일부 시민들을 제외하고 현장을 정리하며 집으로 돌아가기 시작했습니다. 하지만 이번 사태가 남긴 여파는 결코 가볍지 않았습니다. 비상계엄령 선포의 배경과 책임을 묻는 목소리가 높아지고 있으며 이에 대한 진상 조사를 요구하는 움직임이 빠르게 확산되고 있는데요. 전문가들은 이번 계엄령 선포가 헌법과 민주주의의 근간을 흔들 수 있는 위험한 사례로 기록될 수 있다고 경고하며 그 과정과 절차에 대한 철저한 검토가 필요하다고 강조하고 있습니다. SNS와 언론에서는 이 사건을 두고 다양한 논의가 펼쳐지고 있습니다. 일부는 국가 안보를 위한 불가피한 선택이었다고 주장하는 반면 다수는 국민을 배제한 채 내려진 비민주적인 결정이었다며 비판의 목소리를 높이고 있습니다. 특히 시민과 군인이 서로 대치하며 불필요한 충돌이 발생한 점에 대해 많은 이들이 안타까움을 표하고 있는데요. 상황이 이쯤 되자 이번 비상계엄령 사태와 관련한 해외 주요 외신들의 반응이 속속 전해지기 시작했습니다. AP통신, CNN, 로이터 통신 등은 한국의 대통령이 TV 생중계를 통해 발표한 긴급 담화에서 비상계엄을 선포했다며 한국의 야당이 북한에 동조하고 반국가 활동으로 정부를 마비시키고 있다고 비난했다고 일제히 보도했습니다. 특히 미국 CNN은 1980년대 이후 민주적이라고 여겨온 한국에 큰 충격파를 던졌다고 보도하며 당시 실제 상황을 이렇게 전했습니다.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is backing down, saying that he's going to lift his martial law order. And this comes after the country's parliament voted to unanimously block that decree that he had made, and after the president's own party urged him to drop it.
Yeah, that declaration led to huge swarms of protesters hitting the streets of Seoul, demanding that he lift the order, many demanding the president's resignation. Let's go live to the scene in South Korea's capital with CNN's Mike Valerio. Mike, what are you seeing?
Well, we're seeing people in shock and dismay occupying this block, which is right in front of the National Assembly. One of the scenes where this drama played out, where, as you mentioned, all the members of the National Assembly, or many of the members of the National Assembly, come back and unanimously vote to overturn and suspend martial law instituted here in South Korea. So let's push in, show you some of these protesters. There were hundreds of people before. You know, when we were on Boris and Brianna earlier in the evening, I would say about 3 hours ago, we saw 2 military vehicles that were trying to get out of here. One of the pieces of good news that we've been able to report since we were on the air, we saw troops, members of the military, who were positioned up and down this street. Again, one of the main streets of Seoul, one of the main avenues looking to the beautiful National Assembly. All of those military assets seem to have dispersed after that unanimous decision from the parliament and after we heard from South Korea's president that, yep, he was going to back down. Now, what we're waiting for, the cabinet has to come in of the presidential administration and simply give the rubber stamp and say, okay, this is all over. But it seems to be, a palpable sigh of relief. People still honestly befuddled, Boris and Brianna, of how this happened. We have the South Korean president giving a speech over live TV, unannounced, saying that from his point of view, pro-North Korean and anti-state forces were working to overturn the government and infiltrate the state. And we're all kind of wondering, what is he talking about? Very unclear, no specific pieces of evidence, and people who you talk to are wondering similar things. How did the president even decide this? How did he take us down this path? It's such a sensitive, of course, tributary of South Korean history wrapping up here, because this is the first time since 1980 that martial law was instituted right after the Korean War. This is a place where dictators ruled, essentially. We have 28,500 American troops who are spread throughout the country, a crucial American ally. Stability here is key, so we seem to be breathing a sigh of relief, but need to hear from the president about why he did this and what is next, Boris and Brianna.
Yeah, and Mike, what about his future? He's so unpopular, as you have noted in your reports. Can he survive this politically?
So many rules of politics have been rewritten over the past couple of years. It seems unlikely that he will be able to survive, but his critics would say that he does thrive on drama and taking a tough stand, especially against North Korea, and being a fighter. So who knows? Unable to answer that question before the sun rises. If he will resign, so many people want him to. Will he survive? It seems unlikely, but we're buckling up here in East Asia. It remains to be seen.
Mike Valerio with the latest from Seoul. Thank you so much for that update. Let's bring in CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. David, thank you so much for being with us. One of the outstanding questions here is why South Korea's president would have taken this step of declaring martial law if he had all suspected that his National Assembly, including the members of his own party, even the leader of his own party, would vote unanimously to overturn that declaration. What was he trying to accomplish?
It's a real mystery, because it does seem as if he has made one of the great political errors you possibly could. Now, I covered South Korea back in the days when martial law was coming to an end in the 1980s, and the population does not want to go back to that age when even the first presidents who were elected were former generals. And so the transition to a true democracy and to becoming the world's 12th largest economy, which is South Korea's position today, is something that South Koreans of both parties cherish. And so how he thought he was going to get away with this is a mystery to me, especially because, as one U.S. official noted to me, in his initial statement 5 or 6 hours ago, there was no mention of North Korea, of a threat to the sanctity of the state of South Korea. This was all about a way to resolve political gridlock.
Yeah, to that point, how is the U.S. viewing this, David? Because a stable and democratic South Korea is so important to America when it comes to commerce, when it comes to its alliances and its power in the Asia-Pacific region. How are U.S. officials reacting?
Well, first, they were shocked, Brianna, because they had gotten no advance notice of this, which is, violation of rule number 1 with your major allies. Second, they viewed it initially as a huge embarrassment to President Biden, who in March of 2023 invited South Korea to be one of the co-sponsors of one of the White House democracy summits. And the agenda called for countering authoritarianism. So martial law doesn't exactly fit into that. You may recall that the Biden administration, to its credit, brought South Korea and Japan together to help counter China and, of course, North Korea, and considered that one of its major accomplishments in the Indo-Pacific. and that was an initiative that ran through with President Yoon. But they were clearly worried about him just because of the question of his political unpopularity. They were shocked today. I had text messages from administration officials who said their public statements were going to be pretty mild so that they could leave the president room to back down, President Yoon room to back down. And that's exactly what he did. And, you know, we'd all love to hear what those private messages to him were.
David, I'm curious about the veracity of his claims, his justification for installing martial law. One of them being that pro-North Korean operatives had infiltrated the state apparatus. Now, we've seen North Korea conduct some international operations before. I think that the Sony hack is one example. Kim Jong-un going after family members abroad, murdering family members abroad. But is that a legitimate concern for the South Korean government?
Well, as I mentioned before, the statement said nothing about the stability of the South Korean state. So are there North Korean operatives or sympathizers in South Korea? Yes, of course. Have there been since the war ended in 1953? Yes, of course there have been. And so what he didn't do was make the connection about whether or not those influences were actually a true threat to South Korea. And, you know, the only threat to South Korea from the North that I can see is a nuclear one, right? The North now has 60 or more nuclear weapons. Even mounting a conventional attack across the DMZ would be hard for North Korea. So this seemed more like pretense in order to get the upper hand in what I described before as political gridlock than any real threat to the South Korean state. And in fact, I can recall many other moments when I think South Korea's nascent democracy was more threatened in the late 80s and early 90s than it is today.
특히 AP통신은 군인과 시민들이 거친 몸싸움 속에서 포착된 서로를 돕는 뜻밖의 장면이 분노와 혼란의 밤을 관통한 쓸쓸한 아이러니라고 표현했는데요. 쓰러진 군인을 몇몇 시민들이 부축해 일으켜 세우는 순간, 그리고 밀려 넘어진 시민을 군인이 토닥이며 안정시키는 장면은 충돌과 화합이라는 극단적인 대비를 보여주며 사람들에게 씁쓸한 여운을 남겼습니다. 여러분들은 어떻게 생각하시나요? 이상 블랙튜브였습니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다. 구독, 좋아요, 알림 설정은 더 나은 영상 제작 결정에 큰 힘이 됩니다.